Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, the podcast about building and maintaining a healthier relationship with technology. My name is R. Blank, and I run Shield Your Body, where it is our mission to make technology safer for you to use and to enjoy. And that's obviously increasingly important, given just how big a growing role tech plays in each of our lives. This first season is going to be chock full of interviews with some really interesting voices. People who are in the trenches, working to help people live healthier, on subjects ranging from nutrition to addiction to creating a healthier bedroom. We're going to get some great insight this season. And my co-host is my longtime friend and also my operations manager at Shield Your Body, Stephanie Warner. Hey, Stephanie, how are you doing?
Hey, R, I'm doing really great, and I'm super honored that you asked me to be a part of this podcast and to play a role in helping our listeners take control of their health. I'm really excited to release our first season. We've got a great lineup of guests and topics I'm excited to introduce to our listeners. I know our listeners are going to feel better informed and more empowered to take back control of their health. So, are you excited about starting our podcast?
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of speaking. I do a lot of webinars through Shield Your Body, obviously a lot of writing. I've never done a podcast before. And I think, I'm really excited at the potential, what we can bring to our listeners, the value we can bring to them, the topics we can cover. I am really excited.
Excellent. Yeah, me too. And I know everyone's going to be really eager to get into our first interview. But before we do that, I think it would be really nice for the listeners to learn a bit more about you. So, R, would you mind talking to us a little bit about who you are, where you started? What's your origin story with getting into EMF?
Sure. So, I was a software engineer for about 2 decades. I had a company and we built things like games and video apps for companies like Apple, Microsoft, Mattel, and Honda. And you might think that that's a pretty big leap to go from doing that to Shield Your Body. What happened was, it was 2012, and my father, Dr. Martin Blank, who was one of the world's leading EMF scientists, he got a contract to write a book about EMF health effects. And, he's a very well respected scientist, also a fantastic writer, but his writing was really more focused in general on academia, publishing papers and so forth. And so he asked me for some help. Because this book wasn't for other scientists. This book was for people to understand what the science was saying. So he asked me for some help, and I jumped in and we wrote it together. And it was basically a crash course in EMF health science from one of the world's leading researchers. And in the course of writing that book, I realized a few key things. One is that the science, because people, if you bring this up at a party or you're talking to a friend, sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I hear there's a debate. I hear that this stuff. Some people say it's harmful, some people say it's not. And one thing that writing that book showed me is the science here is really strong. It is thousands and thousands of studies showing negative health effects from exposure to levels that regulators and governments say is supposedly safe. So 1, the science is strong. 2, our entire economy is dependent on this stuff, right? So it's not like it was with cigarettes. When it finally was accepted that this stuff was harmful, you could ban it. You could stop people from smoking in public. You could heavily tax the cigarettes. You could actually regulate cigarettes out of existence tomorrow, and the world could keep running. With EMF, that's not the case, because everything on which modern society is built emits EMF. So that includes power lines, light bulbs, refrigerators, appliances, and of course, cell phones and Wi-Fi and all that stuff that we increasingly surround ourselves with. So the science is really strong. But the source of this stuff is fundamental to society. So I realized there had to be safer ways for people to engage with their technology. And that's where the idea for Shield Your Body came from. And that's when I get started. So that was in 2012. I released my first product, which was the Pocket Patch, in 2013, and sort of took it from there.
Wow, that's quite a path to, and quite a direct path to working on EMF products and starting Shield Your Body. And it sounds like, I mean, clearly your father had a lot to do with that, and you guys sound like you were really close. Could you talk a little bit more about, about how he as a person and his work affected you?
Sure. So yeah, my father and I were close, and he passed in 2018. He was actually living with me, and but we'd been close, for I just say our whole lives, but really my whole life. And he'd been working on this EMF stuff for almost my entire life, not quite my entire life, but since before I was 10, he got into this area of research. But I knew that's why, for example, we never had a microwave, and I knew that when I got my first cell phone after college, I should never hold it up against my head. So there were, I was aware that he did this stuff, and I was aware of some of the basics, but it wasn't really until I worked on Overpowered with him. I wasn't as familiar with it. But what was more prevalent in our relationship was his love of science. And I mean, because the guy, he really loved science. And if you talk to any of his colleagues, because I still have the opportunity to speak to many of his colleagues, and he is remembered very fondly. But they also know that he really loved science. And it was some of the things he taught me, and I talk about this on the blog and in the newsletter sometimes, but is an understanding of what science is. But it can be found anywhere. It can be done by anybody. So I remember there was this one time I was growing up. We were in New Jersey, and we had a shed out back, and it was being eaten by carpenter bees, and we found a dead carpenter bee. And I was pretty young. I don't remember exactly how young, but I was pretty young. And he said, "This thing is full of wood," pointing at the bee. I'm like, "No, it's not." He's like, "Yeah, no, this is full of wood." He's like, "Would you like to see?" And so we went in the house. We took the dead carpenter bee. We went into the house, got out the microscope, and cut open the bee. I was like, dang, it's full of wood. Like, I knew carpenter bees ate wood, but the idea that the bee would be full of wood, like that didn't make much sense to me intuitively. So he showed, and it was that stuff happened a lot. And so that's, my father was into other things too. He loved crossword puzzles. He was very sociable. But that, the science really infused a lot. His appreciation of science came across very strongly when I was growing up.
Yeah, it sounds like he really nurtured your sense of curiosity, and that's amazing. So so thank you very much for sharing some kind of personal insight into your father's into your relationship with your father and his natural curiosity and love for science. So, how do you think that his memory and his legacy fit into SYB today?
Sure. Well, obviously, I got into this area because of him, and I started SYB because of my work with him on Overpowered. And I do view that SYB is carrying forward his legacy, but it's not. SYB doesn't do what he did, right? My father was a scientist. I am an entrepreneur and an educator and a technologist and inventor, and probably more than anything, I'm a communicator. And those are my strengths. And so when I talk about carrying on his legacy, I'm not going to be doing some groundbreaking research, unfortunately. Into health effects. Although, of course, the research, a lot of the research is already done. Like, there's always more to investigate. But when my father got into this field, the body of science showing the negative health effects from radiation exposure was much, much smaller. Now it's much more substantial. So in my view, what has to happen now is communicating what is already known and established by science to a broader market. And that's where I see my work and SYB's work fitting in. My father's life and his work was really about investigating the science about EMF and health. And my focus is much more about communicating the science and communicating solutions with a focus on solutions, so that it is important that people understand what the science says. And it's important that people understand what they can do to live healthier given what the science says. And that's sort of where I see the, SYB carrying forward my father's legacy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I feel like, your superpower of being able to communicate this stuff is definitely pushing forward his legacy and his work, and it's opening his work and so many other scientists' work up to, normal people, to regular people who don't understand the depth of the science. And I think that's, I think that's amazing. And it fits perfectly, and very complementary skill sets. So you have the science and then your ability to communicate it. And I think that's great. So how does that actually play out? Like, what is the actual message and work you want to spread through SYB?
No, that's a really good question. And I touched on it a little bit, but
Yeah.
I want to get into it a bit more, right? So first point is, unequivocally, the science shows that EMF is a health threat. And, again, you'll hear it debated in the media: do cell phones cause cancer? Is EMF radiation harmful to our health? There is no debate. The body of science is substantial. This stuff is bioactive. This stuff is harmful. This is not misinformation. EMF is a toxin, and it can really do a lot of damage to different systems in your body. Now, I also want to be clear. I believe, and we're going to hear from several people this season that I think are going to be saying similar things, right? We live in a world that is full of toxins. The world becomes increasingly toxic. There are any number of examples you could pull from, but whether you're talking about microplastics in the water, whether you're talking about antibiotics in our meat, whether you're talking about mercury in our fish or lead in our water, there are a lot of toxins in the world. And I am not saying EMF is the only toxin. So why do I think EMF is so important? Well, one is because it is so poorly understood. It is a very complicated subject if you really try to dive into it. But two, you can't see, smell, touch, taste, or hear it. It is very easy to ignore. And when you add that to the fact that this stuff comes from all of our modern technology, right? We love our technology. Most of us really love our technology. And, we know we love our phones and our internet and our iPads, but we also love our refrigerators and our light bulbs. I mean, we don't actively love those because they are so implicitly part of our reality. But we obviously, if we were deprived of them, we would realize how much we love them. And so you have this thing where EMF is complicated. It's very easy to ignore because you can't sense it. And it is emitted by all of this stuff that we love. And so there is this, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle when you're trying to make people aware of this and care about it, because the bias is going to be to not care about it. So I listed all of those toxins before, right? No one goes around saying, we need more lead in water. No one goes around saying, we need more microplastics in our rivers. No one goes around saying, we need more mercury in our fish. But everyone goes around saying, we need more EMF emitting technology. And that is what the real problem is here, right? Because you're not going to get rid of all of this stuff. Obviously, that would mean going back to 1850, right, before the light bulb. That's not what the solution is here. The solution is to make things safer and to have a saner perspective on what technology we really need in our lives. And that's why I feel a focus on EMF is so important, because the push right now is to pump more and more and more and more of this stuff into our homes, into our environments, to expose us and our families and our children to toxins. And that's why I am so motivated to spread this message and start by saying there is no debate. The science is clear. this stuff is a toxin, and that's why it's an important toxin that to discuss and to address. So my approach is threefold. One, to make people more aware of the science, what the science actually says, not fake science, not faux science, not misinformation, actual science. That, again, is, I think, pretty clearly part of my father's legacy that I try to carry forward. Second is to teach people that the way that they interact with technology, their relationships with their devices, can really do a lot to improve their health and reduce their health risks. And this one's important, right? Because once people start becoming aware that EMF is a toxin, and then start becoming aware of how many sources of this stuff there are in the world around us, the reflexive instinct can be to become terrified, because this is a toxin and it is everywhere. And so you're like, what am I going to do? There's I see 50 Wi-Fi networks in my apartment building when I turn on my computer. I see 5 cell towers. Right? They're putting 5G up. My neighbors, not only do they have all these Wi-Fi networks, they now have all of these Wi-Fi devices in there. What am I going to do about all of it? And you could become overwhelmed. And, yes, this is serious. And yes, we do need to push for a saner approach at the social level, at the level of society. But there is a lot that you can do at the personal level, just with your personal relationship with technology, that can make a really big difference in your cumulative exposure to this stuff and reduce your health risk. So that's the second point. You have power. There's ways that you can interact with technology more safely. And then third, to explain the role that good EMF protection products, like the ones that I make and sell at Shield Your Body, the role that those can play in a solid EMF defense plan. So that is my approach to EMF protection.
Wow, yeah, that's you made many good points, and I really appreciate the approach you're taking to EMF protection. One thing that comes to mind as I listen to you talk about about the approach is that it does become, like, the topic itself does become daunting and scary. Even listening to you first start talking, you're clearly very knowledgeable and passionate about this topic, and, disinformation and people's skepticism about EMF being being an actual toxin. So, I want to step back just a little and ask you, you did say nobody's saying let's go back to the 1850s. You said that. But what do people like your father, who is mired in the science, what did he think about the kind of proliferation of wireless and this type of technology? Like, did he see the balance of the benefits and the versus the risk?
Yeah, he completely did. He didn't have a cell phone when I was growing up, but by the time we wrote Overpowered, he did, and we talk about it in the book. But he wasn't. He was older by that point, and it wasn't a smartphone; it was just a cell phone. So he wasn't going to be glued to it the way that you see people glued to their phones.
Right.
And he would turn it off when he's not used. He would never talk on it up to his head. He had what he considered, and I agree, was a healthier, more balanced relationship with his phone. In the book, in Overpowered, he specifically he says he loves gadgets. He does love gadgets. I mean, increasingly he did love gadgets. Some of them were tech. He loved gadgets of all kinds. I remember I still have somewhere in storage, actually, a collection of slide rules that he gave me for those youngins out there who don't. That's what what people used to use before they had calculators, or these little sliding rulers that did complex mathematical calculations for you. He got through grad school with slide. Anyway, so he had his collection of slide rules. He had a bunch of cameras. He loved cameras. He loved gadgets of all kinds, and he also loved tech gadgets. His message wasn't to abandon gadgets. His message was, the way he would express it is advocating for seatbelts for technology, right? When
I love that.
There were, people were driving. We created the national highway system. People were driving their car. Everyone had cars. They were driving them fast, and they were getting into crashes and dying. No one's response was to say, let's get rid of cars. No one. No one's response was to say, let's get rid of highways. No one. They said, let's put seatbelts in cars. And of course, industry fought it, but eventually they lost that fight, and seatbelts became mandatory on every single car, and people's lives were saved. And so his approach was one of seatbelts for technology. That's how he viewed it.
That's a really great analogy. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think, again, it can be very scary because there's so much EMF we're not in control of. So, I think having that perspective is really, really important. And I just kind of jotted down when you were speaking, because I love this quote that you just said, having a healthy relationship with his phone. So he didn't want to throw the phone away. It was more about having that healthy relationship. So the seatbelt for the phone. I love that. And thank you for sharing that. So just kind of to move forward, there's so many podcasts out there, so many different topics. What do you hope the Healthier Tech podcast will achieve?
So, yeah, that's a really good question, because there are a lot of podcasts. So why would I want to start another one? Well, I spend a lot of time talking about how people can protect themselves from EMF radiation. And, anyone who checks my website, shieldyourbody.com, there's a ton of information up there. Blog posts, articles, ebooks, videos, all about EMF and how to protect yourself from it. I have a mailing list through shieldyourbody.com that covers the same subject. And as you can tell, you know me and what we've just been talking about. This is an issue that I care about, and that's why I focus so much on it. My goal with a podcast is to expand that discussion. See, there's certain things that I tell people all the time whenever I'm talking to people or giving a talk, like stop carrying your phone in your pocket, turn off your Wi-Fi at night, or use high quality EMF protection products like the SYB ones that we make. And those are really important things that you can do to reduce your exposure to EMF radiation, reduce your health risk, and live healthier. But the issues around EMF and health go way beyond these key points. So, for example, we recently on the blog, we covered about some of the aspects of nutrition. So some of the things that you eat can actually directly influence how strong and resilient your body is against damage from EMF radiation. Whether or not you have carpeting in your bedroom can actually impact your body's ability to defend against EMF. And this is real science. This isn't hocus pocus mumbo jumbo. This is real science. Now, it turns out, those are just two examples. It turns out there are a lot of issues relevant to people who are concerned and worried about EMF and health, issues beyond those I normally cover on my website and in my webinars and in my newsletter. And I don't want to change what I cover on my website and in my webinars and my newsletter. I feel like that's important stuff. And that's what my audience, has come to expect to Shield Your Body to be a resource of. But I also wanted to start covering some broader issues, some of these other topics, subject matter areas, like I just was talking about nutrition or bedroom quality. And I thought a podcast would be a really great way to start covering them. So to cover issues not directly or not necessarily directly about EMF, but very relevant to people who are worried about and interested in EMF and health. And I am really just incredibly lucky with the lineup that we have secured for this season. For those who already know about EMF and health, you're going to know a couple of these names right off the bat. For instance, we have Dr. Deborah Davis and Lloyd Burrell, two really big names, very significant contributors to the area of EMF and health. We have two phenomenal building biologists. We have one of the UK's top hypnotherapists to talk about technology addiction. So and we have more. Right. And so I'm really excited for what season 1 of the Healthier Tech podcast is going to look like. And this all is part of SYB's mission, which is to make technology safer for you to use and enjoy. So I'm actually going to turn the tables here. My turn. So you did a good job. You asked some good questions, and I think people have a better understanding of what they can expect, of who I am and what they can expect from the podcast. So there's just one more question that I have, Stephanie, which is, who are you and why are you here?
Oh, that's a great question. I will go with the more direct answer rather than the existential, response I could try and conjure up right now. So I'm here, to keep you grounded and to make sure that every episode ends with highly actionable steps our listeners can start taking today. Because, a lot of these topics are daunting and it's easy to feel overwhelmed to the point of paralysis. I know that's how I feel. I'm not a scientist. This is still relatively a new world for me. And I get overwhelmed with the, oh my gosh, what do I do next? So over the course of this season, I want to ensure that each of the big topics that we cover end with our listeners feeling empowerment and hope. And that's really my goal and the role I'm taking on in this season and the point, my point of being here. Before we get started, I have one last thought I'd like to share with our listeners. So over the many years I've worked with you, I was fortunate enough to meet your father several times. And I was struck by how down to earth, curious, and easy to talk to he was. Back in our days of software, I didn't really understand really anything about EMF, but now I'm here working at SYB and I have a bigger appreciation for the body of his work and the impact on EMF awareness, advocacy, and his tireless effort to affect regulations. And a much bigger appreciation for the reason he always entered the room like Egon from Ghostbusters with his EMF meter, which I always kind of cracked up, but now I really understand why it was important to him to always be measuring. He was a really great man, and I'm so honored to have enjoyed time discussing microwave ovens and why I need to get rid of it. And of course, for anyone who knew him, you'll appreciate, probably like I do, his crafted puns. Seriously, Dr. Blank was the pun master. Super funny guy, and just a joy and a delight to be around. So I really appreciate that I had that time with him.
Thank you.
So are you ready? You ready to get started?
Yeah, I'm excited. I am excited. This little chat we've just had has got me pumped. So everyone, thank you so much for listening to Healthier Tech Podcast. And with that, let's dive into episode number 2. If you like this show and want to hear more, please remember to subscribe to this podcast, the Healthier Tech Podcast, available on all major podcasting platforms. And if you have a moment, please also leave a review. Reviews are critical to help more people find this podcast and learn about the important and undercover topics that we cover. And you can also learn more and sign up for our mailing list to get notified when we have new interviews, webinars, ebooks, and sales at shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldyourbody, all one word.com. You can also just click that link in the show notes. Until next time, I'm R. Blank, and I want to thank you so much for tuning into the Healthier Tech Podcast. And always remember to shield your body.